The first time I stood beneath the rising towers of the Brooklyn Bridge, I felt as though I had wandered into the future. The East River shimmered with the light of a sinking sun, and above me rose two stone giants, their raw granite blocks stacked like the walls of a cathedral. The air was thick with the clang of hammers on steel, the rasp of saws cutting through timber, the bellow of foremen shouting orders in German, Irish, and English. It smelled of sweat, coal smoke, and the sharp tang of hot iron. I could taste the grit of stone dust on my tongue. In that moment, I knew this was not merely a bridge. This was a leap of faith, a gamble of human will against the currents of nature itself. I first met John Augustus Roebling when the dream was only a sketch. He spoke of cables thicker than a man's torso, spun from thousands of steel wires, of towers so tall they would rival Europe's cathedrals, of a span that would stretch farther than any suspension bridge the world had ever seen. Most men laughed at him. They said it could not be done, that the East River was too wide, the currents too fierce, the ice too unforgiving. But Roebling's eyes burned with a certainty that silenced my doubts. He had built bridges before, smaller ones, elegant ones. Yet here was something more. A monument to ambition, a marriage of stone and steel that would bind Manhattan to Brooklyn forever. Tragedy came swiftly. Before the first stones were set, Roebling was crushed in a freak accident on the docks. His foot was pinned between a ferry and a piling, and though surgeons tried, infection claimed him within weeks. Many believed the project had died with him, but his son, Washington Roebling, stepped forward. Tall, reserved, with a soldier's bearing from the Civil War, he inherited his father's dream and his father's burden. The towers rose first, immense Gothic arches of granite hauled from quarries in Maine. I remember the barges arriving, their decks stacked with rough-hewn blocks, men straining with ropes and pulleys to lift each one into place. The towers were not built on solid ground but anchored deep into the riverbed. To reach that depth, workers descended into enormous wooden boxes called caissons, sunk to the bottom of the river and pumped full of compressed air. Inside, in a twilight world lit only by lanterns, men dug through silt and rock, their picks echoing like muffled thunder. The caissons became hell itself. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against the lungs. Sweat poured from every pore. When men returned to the surface, many collapsed, their joints aflame, their chests pounding, their heads splitting apart. No one understood it then, but we now know it as decompression sickness. The bends. Dozens were crippled. Some never rose again. Washington Roebling himself descended often, inspecting the work. One day he staggered out of a caisson, coughing, clutching his chest. The sickness never left him. For the rest of his life, he would be confined to his home, his body broken even as his mind remained sharp. It was then that another unlikely figure entered history. Emily Roebling, his wife. She became his eyes, ears, and voice on the construction site. Each day she crossed the river, carrying his instructions to the engineers, explaining calculations, checking cables, demanding respect from men who doubted her at first. But Emily proved them wrong. She mastered the mathematics of suspension, the chemistry of materials, the physics of load-bearing. Without her, the Brooklyn Bridge would not exist. To this day, her name deserves to be carved alongside her husband's and father-in-law's. In those years, New York itself was a city in flux. Horse-drawn carriages crowded muddy streets, elevated trains clattered overhead, and waves of immigrants poured into the harbor, carrying trunks and bundles and dreams. Every day, crowds gathered by the river to watch the towers rise, as if witnessing the slow birth of a new world. Newspapers sold sketches of the bridge like souvenirs, and vendors hawked roasted chestnuts to curious onlookers. For the common people, the bridge became a spectacle, an entertainment, a marvel, a promise. The cables were the next miracle. Picture thousands of steel wires, no thicker than a pencil, strung back and forth across the river again and again, until they formed ropes strong enough to cradle the weight of a city. Standing on the deck of a swaying boat, I watched men balancing high above the water, walking tightropes with coils of wire on their shoulders. The river roared beneath them, the wind howled, and yet they worked with the precision of watchmakers. It was said that if one wire failed, disaster could follow. Yet the cables held and still hold today stronger than any chain. Few realized that the spinning of the cables itself was a performance for the public. Children perched on rooftops with binoculars, watching the thin wires stretch across the sky like silver threads in a giant's loom. The final cables contained more than 14,000 miles of wire, long enough to circle the globe halfway. And each strand was tested under tension so immense it could snap a man in half if it failed. Not all was triumph. Corruption crept in, as it always does. A contractor supplied substandard steel wire, brittle and flawed. By the time the deception was discovered, some of it had already been spun into the cables. Washington Roebling knew but kept silent, fearing the loss of public faith. Instead, he ordered extra wire added, secretly reinforcing the bridge beyond its original design. It was a quiet act of defiance, a hidden strength born of necessity. The workers themselves were an army of grit and muscle. Many were Irish and German immigrants, hardened by poverty, desperate for wages. They lived in boarding houses, rising before dawn, their hands blistered and raw. Accidents were constant. Men struck by falling stone, crushed by machinery, swept into the river's icy current. Each day's labor carried the weight of death, yet they pressed on. For them, the bridge was not a monument but a paycheck, bought with blood and bone. Years dragged on. The cost mounted. Critics jeered, newspapers mocked, politicians threatened to withdraw funds. Yet the bridge rose foot by foot, cable by cable, stone by stone. And with each day, the dream grew harder to deny. I will never forget the day it opened, May 24, 1883. Crowds surged on both sides of the river. Cannons boomed, flags snapped in the wind, and the stars and stripes waved proudly from the towers. Emily Roebling herself was the first to cross, riding in a carriage, carrying a rooster as a symbol of victory. Behind her came a flood of humanity. Dignitaries, laborers, families, dreamers, all walking across the span that had once been deemed impossible. The bridge trembled beneath their feet, not with weakness, but with life. Not long after its opening, fear struck. On May 30th, 1883, a rumor spread that the bridge was collapsing. Panic surged through the crowd, and in the chaos, 12 people were crushed to death. I remember the screams, the sudden thunder of footsteps, the helpless cries as people were trampled on the wooden planks. The bridge did not fail. It stood firm, unyielding, but the tragedy became part of its story. To restore confidence, P.T. Barnum, the great showman, marched a parade of 21 elephants, led by the mighty Jumbo, across the bridge the following year. The sight silenced all doubts. If elephants could cross, surely so could men. That night, as fireworks lit the sky, I walked halfway across and paused. The city glowed on either side. The East River shimmered below, and above me the cables stretched like the strings of a celestial harp. I placed my hand on the granite tower and felt its cold strength. This was more than stone and steel. It was a testament to perseverance, to sacrifice, to faith in the impossible. It was the triumph of a father's vision, a son's determination, and a wife's courage. As decades passed, the bridge became more than an engineering feat. Lovers carved their initials into its railings. Painters set up easels to capture its silhouette. Soldiers marched across it on their way to war. The bridge entered the bloodstream of the city itself, woven into its identity. Even today, when the sun rises over Manhattan and casts the towers in gold, I feel the heartbeat of those who built it. Their struggle is frozen in every bolt, every stone, every trembling wire. The Brooklyn Bridge endures not only because it was built of granite and steel, but because it was built of sacrifice, of courage, of belief. Even now, when I walk that bridge, I hear the echoes of those who built it. The clang of hammers, the coughs of men rising from the caissons, the soft voice of Emily reading her husband's notes. And I realize the Brooklyn Bridge is not merely a passage across a river. It is a passage across time, binding us not just to each other, but to the enduring spirit of human ambition.